The following weird incident took place in Liverpool in the early 1990s, and it has never been satisfactorily explained. It all started one foggy December evening in 1991. It was 7 p.m. on the Friday evening before Christmas when the Edwards family from Dovecot decided to go and do a bit of late Christmas shopping in Liverpool city centre. Mr. Edwards drove his wife and 4 children to town in his old Volvo estate, and as usual finding a place to park proved to be very difficult. Mr. Edwards drove around, searching desperately for a parking space as his 3 sons and daughter gazed excitedly at the spectacular Christmas lights and decorations lining the streets. The youngest of the Edwards family was Abby, who was only 6 years old, and she loved Christmas, and for days she'd been pestering her mum and dad to take her to see the big fir tree covered with coloured lights down on Church Street. Now, as Abby's dad was grumbling about finding a place to park the Volvo, her mum suddenly pointed to a secluded side street called Bold Place, which runs from Berry Street past the back of St Luke's Church up to Roscoe Street. Mr. Edwards sighed with relief, and he turned left into the poorly lit cobbled road, which lay on a bit of an incline. As soon as the car was parked, the 4 children eagerly jumped out of the vehicle and started pestering their parents about what they were getting for Christmas. Meanwhile, an icy fog rolled down the street. After checking that the doors of the car were locked, the 2 adults had a quick discussion about where they were going to go first. He wanted to go to a shop in Bold Street to buy his father a cardigan, but she insisted on going to Dixon's on Church Street first to buy a CD player for his sister. The children then started arguing too. Naturally, their first priority was to visit the various toy stores. When the father finally snapped, he said, "All right, that's enough, will you all just shut up?" And the whole family responded to the stress in his voice and quietened down, ready to set off. And suddenly Mr. Edwards noticed something, and his heart skipped a beat, and with a look of dread he glanced frantically about Bold Place and he yelled, "Where's Abby?" Everyone joined in the search for the lost child, anxiously looking through the windows of the car, but finding no one there. "Where on earth's she gone?" her mother pleaded with a trembling voice. The 3 boys looked desperately about, but the street was totally empty. At this point they all heard a faint voice screaming out in the distance, "Daddy! Daddy!" The voice sounded like Abby's, and it came from the top of Bold Place towards Roscoe Street. The family rushed up the cobbled road, with their father leading the way. "Abby!" he called. "Where are you?" The gates at the back of St Luke's were open, and he surmised that his daughter must have wandered into the precincts of the old church. He hurried into the grounds, followed closely by his wife and their sons, and once again they all heard Abby cry out for her father, but the little girl was nowhere to be seen, and the fog was getting thicker by the minute. And Mr. Edwards was reluctant to alarm his wife and children, but he secretly wondered if some perverted lunatic had grabbed his daughter and taken her into the ruins of the old church. He handed his wife the car keys, and he asked her to go and bring a torch from the vehicle. When she returned, he climbed up onto the ledge of a church window and he shone the flashlight into the deserted ruins. The interior was deserted, but nothing but rubble was scattered about, and he knew that this church of St Luke had been gutted by an incendiary bomb during the Second World War, during the Blitz. Only the shell of the building survived, and the church had been deliberately left that way as a sort of reminder of the war, and yet it sounded as if Abby's voice had come from inside the church. As Mrs. Edwards helped her husband down from the window, she put her finger to her lips. "Listen," she whispered. The faint eerie sound of a church organ was just audible, and it seemed to be emanating from the church. "Oh, Sam can play very funny tricks of a night," said her husband dismissively. "Come on, let's go and get the police." When his wife began to cry, he tried to reassure her. "It'll be all right, we'll find her, love. She can't have gone far." They set off for the police station in Hope Street, and there they reported their lost daughter to the desk sergeant, who alerted all the patrol cars in the area and told officers on the city centre beat to be on the lookout for the girl. The family then rushed back to Bold Place to resume their search for the girl. They scoured the grounds of St Luke's once again, and after 20 minutes they were about to return to their car when something happened which continues to puzzle them all to this day. A tall man wearing a top hat and a long black coat came out of the grounds of St Luke's, and walking with him was little Abby, holding his hand. And when Abby caught sight of her mum and dad, she ran to them. She started to cry, and as her father picked her up, the sinister man in black looked like something out of the Victorian age. He had long bushy sideburns, a pallid face, and staring ink-black eyes, and he stood like a statue outside the gates of the church, and in a creepy low voice the outdated-looking stranger addressed them.
"Please accept my sincere apology for any distress caused,"
he said. He then turned and walked silently back towards the rear of the church ruins. Mrs. Edwards grabbed Abby from her husband. "Are you all right? Where have you been?" she asked her frantically. "I'm fine, Mummy." Mr. Edwards was furious, and he shouted after the man, "Oi! Who are you? What's your game, eh?" Then a police car came tearing down the road, and he told the officers about the stranger who had returned his daughter. 3 of them bolted from the car and rushed into the grounds of the church, wielding their batons. But the police found no one. The grounds were completely empty. Reinforcements turned up, and the grounds were searched repeatedly with powerful torches, but the place was deserted. However, several police officers also heard the faint strains of a church organ playing somewhere nearby, but they were unable to determine just where the strange music was coming from. One of the policemen asked little Abby where she had been, and the child gave a strange account. She claimed that an old woman in a shawl had grabbed her hand, dragged her into the church where a mass was being celebrated. In the church there were many people dressed in old-fashioned clothing. The women wore big hats and the men were all dressed in black. Abby had screamed for her father, but the old woman had put her hand over her mouth and silenced her. And some time later, she said, a tall man entered the church and pulled Abby from the old woman's clutches. He had been the man who had delivered Abby back to her parents. The intrigued policeman continued to interrogate the child, and he asked her if the man had spoken to her about the strange incident. Abby shook her head, then added that he had said that he had been a long time dead. Everyone went quiet when they heard the child's strange reply. Since the disturbing incident, the Edwards family refused to go anywhere near St. Luke's Church, especially during the Christmas period. After recounting this unusual story on the radio, I received a lot of letters, phone calls and emails from people who had weird tales to tell about St. Luke's. A man who worked in Rapid Hardware in Renshaw Street told me how he'd been driving to work early one morning when he saw St. Luke's lit up on the inside by quaint-looking chandeliers. He could even see the stained glass windows and decided that the church must have been renovated. However, when the witness glanced at the traffic lights out the corner of his left eye, he watched the illumination from St. Luke's fade away. He turned to look back at the old church, and now he noticed that the windows had gone, and the place was in darkness once again. This was just one of the many accounts that I received regarding the church. A woman who worked in the Lacey Street Job Centre up until the 1980s recently told me that during her lunch breaks she would often cross the road and enjoy a sandwich or a cigarette in the quiet grounds of St. Luke's Church. On many occasions this woman and several other people present distinctly heard the faint hum of a church organ's bird-on note, the drone bass which always precedes a piece of organ music which would drift and reverberate round the shell of the empty church. I even received an alleged tape recording of this music, and it really did sound quite eerie.